I want to welcome all of our attendees, including our first timers and our returning members. We have a lot of returning members and regulars, and I love seeing all your faces. Welcome everybody. It's so nice to see you here. I also want to welcome our PBNSG staff member, Marion, for being here. Thank you. She's my director. And Paul was here earlier. He stepped out of the room for now, but he's always here in spirit, that's for sure. He's the founder and CEO of everything PBNSG. So we're lucky to have him in our lives. My name is Megan Burt. A lot of you are familiar with my name and my face by now, but for those that don't know, I'm the director of, we formerly called it director of small groups, and we recently changed it to community support groups. So I'm the director of our community support groups for PBNSG. I myself have been living a plant-based lifestyle for closing in on 15 years, like 14 years to be accurate, but getting pretty close to 15 years. And my primary role with PBNSG is to help support hosts and members of small groups, which again, we now call community support groups, find success and celebrations with their plant-based lifestyles. I have a 4-year-old, soon to be 5, soon to be 20, plant-based toddler, and his health, energy, strength is my daily inspiration to educate and support individuals and families. Nothing excites me more than hearing the success stories and positive effects that results from this way of life, and seeing my son grow up plant-based, which is rare, but hopefully not rare in the future. It's a testament to this way of life. He rarely has colds, has endless energy, and hopefully we can reach the youth of our generations so that they all can have this life that we all need to live. For those that are new to PBNSG, PBNSG stands for Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group. Hey, there's Paul. He came back. He stepped out for a minute. Hi, Paul. I spoke about you for a minute, but then you stepped out, and I sung your praises. Again, back to what I was saying. PBNSG stands for Plant-Based Nutrition Support Group, and we are a nonprofit organization dedicated to evidence-based advocacy and education of plant-based whole foods nutrition, and to help individuals prevent and reverse chronic disease and achieve optimal health. I want to remind everyone that you can visit pbnsg.org website in order to subscribe to our newsletters, register for events, find small group information and recipes. Again, it's community support groups. Ask our physician and dietitian questions, join our Sprout Club, and order merchandise on our shop page. We have a lot of cool stuff on our shop page right now, a lot of cool shirts. They make great gifts. Valentine's Day is next week. And you can find our Perfectly Plant-Based Cookbook, another great Valentine's Day gift, because no better way to show someone you love them with an amazing cookbook. It's a curated plant-based, no oil cookbook with recipes from more than 20 PBNSG chefs. And I'm slowly making my way through it, and I have yet to find one that isn't easy and doesn't taste delicious. Also, please know that PBNSG can be followed on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And lastly, our lineup for February and looking forward to March. Next Thursday, we have our community support group for everyone meeting with Just Mushrooms cookbook chef, plant-based whole foods extraordinaire, Michelle Russell. She has a whole cookbook that just came out on it's called Just Mushrooms, and all this is about mushrooms. So that is next Thursday at 6:30 Eastern time. And then Wednesday, February 17th, we have our virtual event with Dr. Anthony Lim. And after that, we have our culinary event with Brittany Girodi as she discusses healthy breakfast ideas. And then looking ahead to March, we have Dr. Michael Greger, and everyone's pretty familiar with that name, and Dr. Scott Stoll. So March is going to be another good month. I want to introduce our sponsor for the night. We have Christopher from Nourish Box. So I'll do a brief introduction to Christopher, and then he's going to speak for a little bit about his Nourish Box, and then we'll move on to our main presentation. So Christopher is the creator of Nourish Box, a whole food plant-based subscription box. Nourish Box started as a passion project to bridge Christopher's love for discovering of trying new foods with the desire to share the benefits of whole food plant-based lifestyle. Nourish Box has been enjoyed by and received praise from many in the plant-based community, including Tammy Kramer from the Nutmeg Notebook, Brittany Girodi, Dr. Michael Greger, and Julieanna Hever. PBSG began a partnership with him in early 2020 as a way for our members to explore different whole foods products that are exciting, diverse, and fun to eat. Nourish Box is a monthly or subscription box focused on helping you eat more delicious and nutritious plant-based foods. Each monthly box contains 5 or 6 highly quality items like grains and beans and spices, dried fruit, vegetables, vinegars, and whole food snacks. They're very nicely packaged boxes and they're shipped directly to your home and they make wonderful gifts. And as we know, Valentine's Day is just around the corner. I will type in his website in the chat box in a minute. I think I've talked long enough. Christopher, you have the floor.
Great. Well, what didn't you just say? I mean, you basically gave most of the information about Nourish Box. So yeah, I'm Christopher. I started Nourish Box about 2 years ago. And the idea initially started from I was, or have been, subscribed to the Rancho Gordo Bean Club for quite a few years. And as I started getting that, I started finding out about all the different heirloom beans and things that I had really not known about. Like before I started Rancho Gordo, beans were, black beans and kidney beans, and maybe if you got fancy, you'd get cannellini beans. But Rancho Gordo opened up my eyes to a whole new world of variety of beans. And one subscription box, I got a spice from a company called Burlap and Barrel, and it was a wild mountain cumin. And I had had cumin spice before and I'd used it plenty of times, but for some reason, this particular variety that was picked, I think, in Afghanistan just smelled so amazing. You just open the can and it was just like a heavenly scent. And it was just so much more potent, just so much more different than the other cumin seed that I had tried before. And I just didn't realize, when I think of spices, you just go to the grocery store and pick your spice off the shelf and you don't really think about where it came from, who grew it, who picked it. So it really opened up my eyes to a whole new world of ingredients, origins, and really quality ingredients. Anyway, so I created Nourish Box, and I had been whole food plant-based for about a year or so prior to that. I had come to whole food plant-based eating via Dr. Greger. About a decade prior, I had attended one of his talks and continued to keep track of him eventually as he started nutritionfacts.org and into the Daily Dozen. And I'm getting off track here, but anyway, so I've been whole food plant-based for a little while. And after I got that Rancho Gordo box, I thought it might be interesting to create a subscription box specifically for people who are whole food plant-based and looking for specifically salt, oil, and sugar-free products. There are plenty of other vegan subscription boxes, but most of those focus on snacks. There are lots of salty and sugary snacks. So I thought it might be interesting to introduce people who are whole food plant-based to really interesting, unique, and delicious ingredients that they might not otherwise come across. Each Nourish box comes with, as she said, around 5 or more, usually 5 to 7 in items. There's usually a couple of pantry staples like heirloom beans and whole grains. Then there's a couple of seasoning items. Could be a single origin spice, salt-free seasoning mix, vinegar. I've included date sugar. So a couple items for creating flavor, and then usually a fun item like a snack or perhaps tea. All PBNSG members can join for a $5 with a $5 discount using a discount code PBNSG when they subscribe. Again, it's a monthly subscription. It's $50 if you do a month-to-month subscription You can do 3 or 6 month prepay, where you prepay for 3 or 6 months at a time. And for those, you get a little bit of a discount. Usually the cutoff for each month's subscription or each month's box is the end of the previous month. So unfortunately, being the 4th of February, the February box subscriptions have already closed, and that's all sold out. So if you were to subscribe right now, you typically wouldn't get your first box until March. But for anyone who uses the discount code PBNSG in the next week, I will contact you via email, and I will give you an option of some of our individual Nourish boxes, which are previous month's Nourish boxes that were some of our favorites of our subscribers that we still have available. And I will send that to you immediately. And so your first box would be that, and then you would get another, your next box would be March. So I'm not sure if there's any questions.
I was on your website earlier today, and the boxes look phenomenal. And I actually was thinking, again, Valentine's Day. I like to send my parents things for Valentine's Day, friends and family. So I think it makes a great gift. And I also was tempted to order a couple of the options for myself, but
yeah, right now for Valentine's Day, all of our individual Nourish boxes will ship pretty much immediately. You can gift those. We can send them directly to people, and you can include a gift message if you'd like, or you can just gift yourself, buy yourself individual Nourish box and enjoy that. The individual Nourish boxes, you know exactly what you're going to get, whereas each month it's always a surprise. You won't know what it is until you get it. But I always curate the items around kind of a loose theme. This here is our January Nourish box, which was focused on, well, it's called In With the New. I don't know if you can read it here, I'll show you. In With the New for Nourish box, and also January. We featured all businesses that I've never had in the Nourish box before. And also with it being January, I chose items that would make it super easy to, well, usually in January with New Year's resolutions, people are rededicating themselves to eating healthy. So it's got items that will help make it a little easier to eat healthy. So we've got Well Your World Stardust salt-free seasoning mix, which is really nice for just kind of general seasoning where you might use salt. It's beautiful. Can't really see it in the light. It's a tawny rosé vinegar from Keep Well Vinegar. It's a delicious vinegar from a producer in Pennsylvania, I believe.
We have a quick question. Do you deliver to Canada? Do you deliver to Canada?
I don't, unfortunately. I
Okay.
haven't looked into, I know that for one thing, it's really expensive to ship to Canada, but I believe that there's some restrictions as far as various food items, shipping them across the border. I haven't looked into that, but I know I've had interest from other people to ship to Canada. So it is something I'd like to do at some point.
And one more question, are your items generally organic?
I try to include organic as much as possible. Unfortunately, not everything is available organic, especially when it comes to heirloom beans. They're a little difficult to produce organically, like completely, non-synthetic fertilizer free. So those are rarely organic, but I usually try to include as much organic as possible.
Thank you. Well, everybody, the website's nourishbox.com. And again, you can access it through the PBNSG promos page or directly at nourishbox.com. And you can get $5 off if you enter PBNSG on the order. Thank you, Christopher. Your website's amazing. And thank you for helping us all live a more plant-based lifestyle.
Of course. Thank you for helping. Thank you.
We're going to move on to our feature presentation with Julieanna Hever. A quick background, and then I'll let her have the floor. So I got to tweak this for a second. Sorry, replace the spotlight. Julieanna Hever presents the Mediterranean Diet, Lessons from a Plant-Based Dietitian. The Mediterranean diet has been considered the gold standard dietary pattern for decades, and with good reason. It's been linked with lowered risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. In this talk tonight, Julieanna is going to demonstrate why olive oil, fish, and red wine are not the secret to health and longevity, but rather that by focusing on whole plant foods, they will promote wellness and ideal weight management, and you can reap the benefits of the most researched and beloved diet. Julieanna Hever is a plant-based dietitian, has a BA in theater and an MS in nutrition, bridging her biggest passions for food, presenting and helping people. She's an expert in plant-based nutrition, weight loss, and chronic disease reversal and prevention, and she's authored 5 books, including The Health Span Solution, Plant-Based Nutrition, The Idiot's Guide, and the Vegetarian Diet. I like that name. I had to struggle with it, but that's a cute name. The Vegetarian Diet. I'll have you correct. Vegetarian Diet. I'll type it in the chat box. You're shaking your head. Along with 2 peer-reviewed journal articles on plant-based nutrition for healthcare professionals. She was the host of What Would Julieanna Do? Gave a TEDx talk, and instructed for the eCornell Plant-Based Nutrition Certification Program. Without further ado, you have the floor. You can correct me on how I pronounced that cool name of that book, and then I'll type in your website in the chat box for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Megan, thank you. Actually, that is the name of the talk, so it's kind of perfect. So I'm happy to say it, and I love that it's a little tongue twistery, but that book is what we're going to talk about tonight. It's the Vegetarian Diet, and I'll explain. So thank you all. Thank you to PBNSG for having me. And it's so nice that we could be all united around the world or country all together here. I'm really excited. I'm coming to you live from Los Angeles, California, where I am based. And I'm going to flip and try to share my screen because I've got a full-on presentation. So let's see, I've just learned Zoom in the last few months, like many of us. And I'm getting better at it, but bear with me. Share screen, presentation, and fingers crossed. Dun, 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 dun. Yes?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, you got it? You can see my screen? Yay,
Yep.
okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so today I would like to offer up some perspective on the Mediterranean diet, but from the specific vantage point of a dietitian who focuses on a whole food plant-based diet. And I like to call this, as I said, the Vegetarian diet. So I've been in the health and fitness industry for over 25 years, which is crazy to think about. My daughter started driving this week. Oh my gosh, brace myself. And I've written, I've worked with clients, hundreds or probably thousands of people at this point. And interestingly, I always notice that every year US News does this review on best diets of the year, and the Mediterranean diet is always the top of the list, #1. And there's always so much good press and so much good media for the Mediterranean diet. And I was always like, that's kind of interesting. And one day I was actually asked to give a talk on a cruise in the Mediterranean, which was, yes, a really exciting gig. And I was sitting in my cabin with my mom looking out at the Mediterranean, and we'd been eating all this amazing Mediterranean cuisine. And this came to my mind. I'm like, why is it that the Mediterranean diet gets all the press? And have they seen the data on a plant-based diet? Have they seen that we actually have been able to reverse advanced stage cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes with the plant-based diet? The results were not exactly the same with the Mediterranean diet. So that was what inspired me to do a deep dive into the Mediterranean diet data and try to get to the bottom of this. So of course, any discussion of the Mediterranean diet requires that we acknowledge the first description by Ansel Keys over a half century ago. After a trip to Naples in 1952 with his wife and lifelong research partner, Margaret, he began to further investigate and define not only a diet, but the many other elements of lifestyle that many contribute to the region's superior health outlook. Despite all these claims that you may have heard, it's pretty out there, that maligned Ansel Keys with these accusations of like single-minded research, nothing could be further from the truth. He was always clear about his limitations surrounding association and causality in terms of statistics. And he insisted that those who opposed the epidemiological evidence supporting the connection between hypercholesterolemia and atherosclerotic heart disease also be cautious on drawing the negative inference. Most importantly, this amazing husband and wife team's tireless observations and investigations were critical in establishing the health benefits of a Mediterranean diet and lifestyle. It was a diet that they both lived by until his death at 100 years old and hers at 97. It's a beautiful love story and a provocative example of a passionate life dedicated to careful scientific investigation. And Dr. Joel Kahn, who you all know well here, has given a wonderful talk, if you haven't seen it already, on Ansel Keys, and it's just so interesting. But let's start by shattering the most common myth. Most of us would, when you think about it, you hear, oh, the Mediterranean diet, so I include olive oil and red wine and fish, and that's like the crux of the benefit of the Mediterranean diet. Well, these really aren't the salient features, and so I wanted to take a deeper dive into that. When and where they were looking at this population, olive oil was important. It did add calorie. They needed these extra calories for the common laborers they were eating a meager, mostly plant-based diet. Olive oil is primarily monounsaturated. It contains higher amounts of oleic acid, tocopherols, and phytosterols than the other oils. But, basically we're in the Mediterranean. There's a lot of olives. They were able to extract the oil and preserve it. And it was a wonderful way to get a lot of calorie in times of scarcity. Now, I love a glass of wine as much as anyone, but the 1,000 bottles a day necessary for the therapeutic dose of resveratrol is just a little over the top. Although I guess if you're drinking 1,000 bottles, you're not really going to be worried about your cholesterol so much. But really, wine was part of the lifestyle, and maybe, could provide for some relaxation, but alcohol is still a toxin, and there's plenty of evidence for its potential health risks. The fish was slightly different, what they were looking at, because they were lower on the food chain, not the larger prey fish, which tends to concentrate lipids and environmental toxins. There were some other animal products consumed, but it was like, instead of the hunk of meat in the middle of the plate, it was used more as a condiment or a flavoring or on special occasions, unlike how we are using it today. So I'm going to get a little geeky. I hope you'll bear with me. And I'm going to go through something that's quite important when it comes to the Mediterranean diet and kind of what you hear about the controversy and all the stuff you hear out there in the media. And there's just so much confusion about it. So I put it all together in an outline to give you some of the highlights of how the lipid hypothesis evolved. There's always seems to be some kind of attack on the lipid hypothesis on social media or on Ansel Keys himself, in spite of overwhelming evidence from epidemiological studies, metabolic ward investigations, animal models, and even genetic research, which we're going to touch on. So in 1913, a dietary cholesterol connection began with Anichkov's observation of dietary cholesterol in rabbits. Ansel Keys later points out that rabbits, unlike humans, rats, or dogs, have little ability to clear dietary cholesterol through their bile. He established that we were less sensitive to the impacts of dietary cholesterol, especially, and this is important, when daily consumption exceeds 200 milligrams. Well, on the standard Western diet, the consumption exceeds 200 milligrams. Ansel Keys began the Minnesota Business and Professional Men's Study in 1947. He looked at 281 healthy men that were aged between 45 and 55 years. By about 15 years, 32 developed coronary disease, 17 suffered coronary deaths, and 16 developed changes consistent with coronary heart disease. But it was Ansel and Margaret Keys' 1952 trip to Naples that resulted in his first connection between diet and coronary heart disease. At the 1951 meeting of the FAO Committee on Food and Nutrition, Dr. Gino Bergami of University of Naples Medical School He insisted coronary heart disease, that was no problem in Naples. So in order to directly assess those claims, Ansel and Margaret Keyes loaded up their lab equipment into their car, of course, and headed to Naples. After measuring 356 Neapolitan workers, they confirmed they all did indeed have low cholesterol levels. However, and here's what's so interesting too, the 100 wealthy members of the Rotary Club and the Bolognese policemen that were assessed, they had a diet that was closer to the US population at the time, and they indeed too had similarly high cholesterol to that seen in the 134 Minnesotans. In 1953, Ansel Keys' now famous Mount Sinai diet speech, which is now often confused with the 7-country study, which you may have heard of, presented a first look correlation of total deaths from all heart disease against calories as a percentage of fat for 6 countries for FAO data. So these countries were chosen by Keys as representing fully comparable dietary data and vital statistics. He felt strongly that it was important to move beyond these emerging associations to more rigorously controlled prospective cohort study. And that is what he did in 1958. He launched that investigation with what we now know as the 7-country study. This looked at thousands of individuals, and they directly assessed and monitored over decades. The first results were presented in 1970, but the follow-ups included all the way, they continued all the way through now. They're still continuing. Not surprisingly, when they looked 50 years later at the cretins, the daily meat consumption, it's kind of mind-blowing actually, in these participants, now they were in their 90s, the meat consumption had doubled and their fruit and vegetable consumption had dropped by 60%. Returning to the timeline, it wasn't until 1961 that Keys first offered the suggestion of specifically limiting saturated fat in Appendix 2 of the American Heart Association's report of the Central Committee and Medical Community. The notion that he rushed to demonize fat or saturated fat, that's what a lot of people claim, is just fiction. In my look at over 50 publications authored by Keys from the late 1940s to the early 70s, it's clear he considered many associations. So he looked at physical activity and vitamins and dietary carbohydrate, gender, race, smoking, obesity, lipid chain length, and even population migration studies. So it was a very holistic approach. It was in April of 1970 in a special edition of Circulation that coronary heart disease in 7 countries was reported and showed strong associations between dietary saturated fat intake, blood serum cholesterol, and the risk of coronary heart disease. Finally, in 1974, Brown and Goldstein elucidated the LDL receptor and LDL receptor-mediated endocytosis, offering even more evidence of the connection between saturated fat and heart disease. They actually were recipients of the 1986 Nobel Prize in Medicine for this exact work. The attractiveness of familial hypercholesterolemia as an experimental model stems from the existence of homozygotes. These individuals, who are just about 1 in a million, inherit 2 mutant LDL receptor genes, one from each parent. Their disease is severe. They have a 6 to 10-fold elevations in their plasma LDL, the LDL cholesterol, from birth, and they often have heart attacks in early childhood. The early atherosclerosis in homozygous FH children who do not have any other risk factors, obviously they're not smoking, they don't have high blood pressure at this point, or diabetes, or type A personalities. This provides a formal genetic source of evidence to show that elevated LDL alone can produce atherosclerosis in humans. Just for contrast, let's consider all the children today that are obese, eat excessive amounts of sugar and saturated fat, and are physically inactive. We don't see them suffering from cardiovascular disease early in life because this process takes longer, takes years. It would take, I will say, extraordinary evidence to unseat this lipid hypothesis at this point. And I mean, obviously I see the substantiation of this in my practice, obviously that's anecdote, but I always say results are typical. A whole food plant-based diet, when applied, people ameliorate their blood pressure and their cholesterol. And I think that, something Keys, who was not a vegan, not a vegetarian, he also concluded this. He asked these questions his entire life, and I think he was correct. The lipid hypothesis is sound, but we've all heard this conflicting data. and these news that somehow all this work is unseated because they had a couple of these meta-analyses out there. But this is without metabolic ward studies, no proposed underlying physiological mechanisms. And, butter is not back. So because of that, I wanted to segue this into a greater conversation about food and nutrition. I think the number one biggest problem, the big kerfuffle, if you will, I actually just looked that word up today because it was like the perfect word for this situation, is macro confusion. So I'm going to go away a little bit from the Mediterranean for a minute. We'll come back, but really all of the problems in nutrition today stem from this. This is what I believe. And I'm on a mission to change the language of protein, carbs, and fat, because this is not only confusing at the layperson perspective, this is confusing for healthcare professionals. I speak to thousands of doctors and dietitians and nurses all around the world, and it's confusing even at the research level. I talk with a lot of researchers. It's the reason we're so confused. And I have videos about this too, just the overall premise of this. The perfect epitome of where this all gets muddled and kerfuffled, because now it's maybe my new favorite word, is there was a study in the 2018 Lancet journal. And the conclusion was that a low carb diet and a high carb diet increased mortality. What do you do with that information? What does a researcher do with that information? How do you come to that conclusion? And I would offer the fact that nutrition is so complicated and there are variables and all that, but it's very hard to control for everything. And it's very hard to make associations. And that is why we have used these biochemistry terms. I'm going to get into more detail, more geeking out, if you will. Bear with me, because I think it's important to have all this the facts behind all of this. But it's a way of talking about food that means nothing. It's absolutely meaningless. So let's dig into each of those macros, if you will, and we'll start with protein. It seems that there is a never-ending pursuit for enough protein in the diet. I mean, before we look for it in the diet, let's just talk about what exactly is a protein and how it's actually used as an element of all life. Protein is the building blocks of life. They form the basis for every structure, every function in all living organisms, enzymes, fibers, fingernails, hormones, antibodies. But protein is not a food group. This is not a protein. This is an egg. Eggs contain protein, and so do potatoes and beans and all things living. But it gets a little more complicated because every living cell, potato and chicken alike, contain thousands of proteins. It's not just a single substance, no more than you could say a metal would adequately describe iron versus aluminum versus gold. Protein just isn't as descriptive as we need in a dietary sense. We need to know more. Our real quest in dietary protein, that pursuit of protein, is to acquire the necessary essential amino acids for life. So loosely speaking, there are 20 amino acids which act much like the 26 letters of the alphabet. When one digests a plant or animal protein, they're broken down into the individual letters and we create the words and sentences and our paragraphs of our genetic book of life, if you will. The problem is that no animal makes all 20 amino acids. So it's kind of like protein jeopardy, and we must, quote unquote, buy a vowel through diet to complete the words. So this brings us back to that age-old question. I just had it in an interview the other day. I get it every day, pretty much. Where do we get our protein? The DNA of all organisms is the blueprint for the tens of thousands of different proteins that make up all living cells. Animals, unlike plants, must acquire some of the amino acid building blocks, the essential amino acids, through diet. And these are used in our ribosomes as part of the RNA printing press to produce the myriad proteins required for all of our various structures and physiological life-giving functions. We don't really exactly have a strict need, dietarily speaking or biologically speaking, for protein, but rather we need a source of nitrogen to synthesize the non-essential amino acids and a dietary source of essential amino acids, a subset of the amino acids that we can't make on our own. Despite our need for the subset of essential amino acids, the 10 to 25,000 different proteins are synthesized in cellular ribosomes. Protein was a convenient isocaloric organic chemistry organization scheme over 170 years ago, and boy, did it stick. So I want to answer the question, where do you get your protein, in a way that's accurate and maybe a way you haven't heard it said before. It's synthesized in our ribosomes and it doesn't originate in diet. Let's go one step deeper and look at exactly how essential amino acids themselves are synthesized and where they originate. Any of you that have had chemistry and all of this will bring back memories. It's so beautiful and synergistic. There is like this gorgeous interdependence, this symbiotic thing, this relationship with all of the Earth's biosphere. And among the most important to consider of cycles is that of nitrogen. During nitrogen fixation, elemental nitrogen is synthesized into complex aminated molecules like the amino acids. We fertilize plants with inorganic nitrogen, either directly using ammonium salts or indirectly through the composting of organic material. The plants synthesize all amino acids because plants can't eat, of course, and these are all, of course, required for all enzymatic, structural, and hormonal elements of life. Particularly speaking, many leguminous plants host symbiotic bacteria, diazotrophs, which fix that atmospheric nitrogen into the more usable forms of ammonia that can be used in turn to synthesize amino acids, including the essential amino acids listed here. Animals, including us humans, we eat the plants, we rupture the cell walls through mastication or chewing, we digest the plant proteins with these proteolytic enzymes, and then we absorb the amino acids for ribosomal protein synthesis. This process is identical whether the protein originated from an animal or from a plant cell. What isn't identical is the distribution of certain essential amino acids like methionine and leucine and lysine. And that has been the discussion about protein for decades. Like, this is where it all stems. Those branched chain amino acids, and we need more of these essential amino acids. This is where it all has been discussed for so long. But interestingly, with the newer and the more and more data on health span and longevity, these are likely the amino acids we paradoxically need to limit. But ultimately, we eat the plant or we eat the animal that ate the plant. Either way, the dietary essential amino acids originated in that plant or bacteria. Cotton, book paper, the chitin of crab shells, potatoes, legumes, sugar, and rice. These are all carbohydrates, but clearly these are not isometabolic foods for humans. So if the word carbohydrate didn't exist, how else could we group these disparate foods together? And this, again, is the basis for so much of the confusion. If we continue to use protein, carbs, and fat as food groups, we will continue to fuel an unresolvable debate, as evidenced in that 2018 Lancet journal. Each side of the sugar versus oil debate, false dichotomy, pits their best sources against the other side's worst. I don't think anyone here today would put a 3-bean chili with quinoa in the same category as a donut, right? But there are plenty of randomized controlled trials juggling macronutrient profiles and ratios that do exactly that. Compared to what is the question not asked often enough. By organizing foods in these isoenergetic same calorie groups, we've created an unimaginable mess and fueled endless unproductive debates. Is there a similar lesson in here for dietary fat? You know there is, of course. Let's dig in a little bit. So like we've seen with the amino acids of proteins and of carbohydrates, not all lipids too are isometabolic, same metabolically speaking, despite even having the same calories. Two energetically identical lipid molecules may have profoundly different health impacts. So generally speaking, saturated fats, which we're focusing on for the Mediterranean diet, those are primarily found in animal products and tropical oils. The molecule chains are very linear, as you could see in the picture. Like straight hair, they kind of pack densely, and so they solidify at high temperatures. That's why you'll have it solid when you leave it outside. On the other hand, Plant fats tend to be unsaturated, which creates a kink at the naturally occurring cis double bond. So like kinky hair, they frizz out and tend to be liquid at higher temperatures. Recognizing the early issues discovered in the 1950s and 60s with saturated fats from this evidence that we were talking about today, the potential health benefits of unsaturated fats, and the lower cost of plant oils that led to hydrogenation. This was introduced to make unsaturated fats spread and cook like animal saturated fats that people were accustomed to using. So the plants naturally tend to form cis double bonds. The isomeric mixture of cis and trans occurs in the synthetic partial hydrogenation of vegetable oils. Trans fatty acids are formed, and these are somewhat intermediates between the two. Well, everyone seems to agree about the unhealthfulness of trans fats. You know, they were banned several years ago. There still, for some reason, is all this confusion and contradictory messaging on saturated versus unsaturated fats. Of course, my recommendations are that all fats in the diet are sourced from whole plant foods, not oils or butters, and that these will be primarily from mono and polyunsaturated fats. But we'll talk a little bit about that later. So instead of using protein, carbohydrate, and fat as food groups, because it is so confusing, you know, meat and eggs and beans, those are not protein. Potatoes and rice are not carbohydrates. Avocados and cheese aren't fats. These are foods, and these all contain different compounds and different ratios of these different things. So I would rather us change this conversation back to food. And this is how I suggest, this is what we recommend. This is a food triangle. And if you haven't seen this, it's in all my books after Vegetarian, actually. But it's just a new way. So I've shifted away from pyramids and plates, and I'm using a triangle more as just a way to get away from protein, carbs, and fat. It basically recognizes that animals and plants, they concentrate nutrition and energy differently. So this way of organizing food and energy density permits you to look at the micronutrient requirements, which you can get mostly at the apex of the triangle, without driving chronic overnutrition, which is done with the vertices of the two vertices on the bottom. At the apex are leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables, stems such as asparagus and celery, bulbs such as onions and garlic, and mushrooms. These top triangle foods become the nutritional foundation for daily meals, rather than the more energy-dense meals that are at the bottom. So you get a whole slew of phytonutrition and vitamins and minerals, and basically you could eat those top triangle foods in unlimited quantities because they're so nutritionally dense but calorically light. This further places emphasis on foods that are high in fiber and is increasingly seen as crucial for a healthy gut microbiome. If you look down the left side of the triangle where you're increasing the energy density, you'll see the concentrated energy from animal sources, meat, eggs, fish, and dairy. While on the bottom right side is where concentrated energy from plants come from, fruits, cereals or whole grains, pulses, starchy vegetables, nuts, and seeds. And you'll see that this can explain everything that you hear out there too. So if we consider a plot of energy density versus diet composition, the food triangle successfully predicts the results of many popular diet schemes that we hear about all the time. This is when people go, well, how come the paleo diet's so healthy? Or the keto, you can replace it with the keto now. Well, this explains it. A Western diet basically consists of combinations from the bottom of the food triangle. So as it came from the original article as bottom feeding, right? So steak and potatoes, meat sauce and pasta, curry and rice, burger and fries. This is often accompanied by the addition of refined oils and sugars and salts and flours, which not only make this for more energy dense, even more energy dense, but it also makes it hyper palatable, meaning we're going to eat it more. We're more likely to eat more of it. The authors of these papers where this was originally published, they argue that obesity and chronic overnutrition may be because of an unintended consequence of this bottom feeding. An Atkins or paleo or now keto style diet would basically be the reason they can be successful is because they're eating on the left side of the food triangle. Definitely improvement from bottom feeding because they're eliminating the refined adulterants seen so often in the Western diet. It controls calories, and that therefore enables people to see some of the benefits that they're seeing. On the right side is what, of course, I recommend is a plant-based or vegan diet, which emphasizes whole food plant-based source starches and sugars as primary energy sources. The exception here is the nuts and seeds, which are, of course, important for getting those healthy phytonutrients and the necessary essential fatty acids that we require. But what I'm seeing now in the last 5 years, which I hadn't seen prior to this, is a surge of plant-based eaters that are adding those. So you could basically bottom feed on vegan food. So anything you could eat, I could do vegan, we say now, because you could have vegan steak with potatoes, vegan chicken and fries, vegan fish, whatever the combinations are. It's now become an interesting problem that I didn't really expect to see. So it's easy to just kind of look at this and forget about protein, carbs, and fat and say, just keep eating to the right of that triangle. Back to the Mediterranean. Its success is not likely defined by oil, nor wine, nor fish, but these are likely tolerated to some extent in the diet. Let's talk really about what I think is the vegetarian success. I believe from my research that there are 5 underpinnings to the vegetarian lifestyle that is why the Mediterranean diet has so much fame and love out there. One is that it's a whole food plant-based diet. It really was. It essentially is a whole food plant-based diet when they looked at the actual research. Also, synergistic phytonutrition. I'm going to dig into all of these. The overall lifestyle, and then less is more, and then, pardon my accent, but deliziosa cucina. I write in my book in the preface how I'm a Italophile, and this is where Dr. Khan and I also have bonded because we love everything Italian. And so I put a little bit of Italian as much as I could inside of this book because for fun. All right, so first and foremost, the Mediterranean diet is and always has been. It's changed, and that's where the change in the outcomes have been. But essentially, when they were studying it, when they got this initial data, it was a whole food plant-based diet. Animal products composed maybe up to 10% of total calories in the Mediterranean diet, saved as celebratory foods for holidays, and like I said before, in condiment-sized portions, and just not the basis of the diet. And this is my favorite point, synergistic phytonutrition. I just think the human body is so extraordinarily magnificent in its complexity and its intricacy, as are whole plant foods. And, you know, these are abundant in these beautiful phytonutrients. We haven't even identified all of the phytonutrients that are out there and how they play together. And then you put it into your body and there's this incredible thing that happens. And basically it just supports a synergistic approach to health. And the lifestyle, it's not just the diet. Traditional meals were enjoyed together as a family, you know, with times of relaxing and extended period of time for meals where they actually sat and chewed and enjoyed and socialized. This is where there's this beautiful relation back to the blue zones. So, you know, you're looking at these populations, the Mediterranean diet is one, or the Mediterranean culture is one of those blue zones where, you know, you look at all of the things that are in common amongst these different long-lived healthy populations. And it was the lifestyle too. So it's not just the diet, it's also movement, and it's also stress management and smoking cessation, alcohol consumption. All of those things come into play. And this could all be addressed mindfully by eating mindfully, socializing with loved ones when possible. Boy, everything has changed in the last year since I've given this talk and written this book several years ago. But it's important to think about, you know, it's not necessarily about exercise. I've changed a lot in my work, more focused on health span now. It's not about how hard can you push your workouts. It's more about, you know, being active. It's not necessarily sedentary, is not the opposite of exercise. So it's really about being more active. And finally, less is more. So I love that saying, hara hachibu. It's a Japanese phrase, and it means to, it literally translates as 80% full. And this is an Okinawan practice in mindfulness, mindful eating, which is what I teach with my clients. It's all about being more mindful. And it's about eating till you're 80% full. So it's really going within and not having these hard, fast, I'm measuring and all that. It's about like, when am I hungry? Like really knowing hunger and satiety. And that I think is the most empowering tool that I teach my clients, because if you can go within, your body has so much wisdom We don't have to rely on exogenous sources. Oh, and the final point, of course, that deliciosa cucina. One of the reasons that a Mediterranean diet boasts so much long-term compliance, because honestly, when you study diet, the research always looks at the compliance. That's a big component of diet research, nutrition research. And that's because people don't want to stick to the diet if it doesn't taste good. I mean, who wants to stick to a diet that doesn't taste good? So that's what's wonderful about the Mediterranean diet. That's why people love it so much, is because there's some amazing cuisine. And that is what I put in my book. Was when I did the recipes in this book, I did some from all different regions. I didn't just do Italy. I did a lot of Middle Eastern cuisine, because there's a lot of different countries that surround that Mediterranean Sea and have a very similar type of diet. So just as an example, here is one way to look at an overall health promoting whole food plant-based diet. Basically, everyone agrees, the USDA, the American Institute for Cancer Research, Harvard School of Public Health, half the plate should come from fruits and vegetables. Approximately a quarter of the plate, well, really, I like to say, I use my 6 daily threes. I hope I have that slide in here. About 1 to 1.5 serving, 1 to 1.5 cups of legumes every day. And then about 1 to 2 ounces of nuts and seeds. That's where you should prioritize getting your essential fats from. And then I added a section for mushrooms in the last couple of years, because they are so health promoting. My goodness, I try to eat them every day. And when I've interviewed Paul Stamets, he said to try to consume 3 different types of mushrooms in a week. So I'm very adamant about that. My phone is ringing somehow, even though I shut everything off. Sorry about that. And then, of course, I also gave leafy green and cruciferous vegetables their own category, because they are that extraordinary. They just offer such a unique portfolio of phytonutrients that I could recommend consuming those every single day. And then whole grains, I gave that like a side category. It's not part of my 6 daily threes. They are very important and healthy, but there's nothing nutritionally unique in whole grains that you can't get in all these other categories. So they're kind of a eat them to substantiate for satiety and for culinary diversity. So when you look at that whole food plant-based diet, for those of you that are not as familiar with the specific nutritional needs, let's cover that real quickly. Most of these overlap with the vitamin and mineral that people need to be noting on a wider population basis. So if you look at all of these are all the vitamins and minerals that we talk about, the essential vitamins and minerals. There really are only 5 that we need to give a little bit of extra attention and love to with a plant-based diet. So first, I'm going to address the very specific issues of B12, and then I'll touch on vitamins D, K, zinc, and iodine. This is a topic I'm quite passionate about, because there is no debate about B12. If you are on a vegan diet, if you are over the age of 50, no matter what your diet, you need a source of vitamin B12, because you're gonna run into problems, and it may be too late. It's the best way to avoid potentially irreversible neurological impairment is to supplement with vitamin B12. It's safe, effective, it's cheap and convenient, and it can be it can be life-saving. I've seen it now at this point, and it is very common among plant eaters to ignore this really important nutrient. Basically, we don't get it from plant foods. We can get it from the supplements the best, and we won't be able to track it necessarily in terms of our blood work, because there's so much controversy there. Here's a way. It's also a very finicky vitamin. It's actually the most finicky vitamin. I always say it's got an attitude problem, because it requires a certain amount of dosing to have the appropriate absorption. So here is how we recommend you dose this. Right here. It's one of these 3 choices are ideal and optimal for how our body functions. So either 50 micrograms twice a day, if you like to take more pills more frequently, or 150 micrograms once a day, or if you like fewer pills, you could just do one whopping dose of 2,500 micrograms once a week. And so I would recommend that. That's on my website, plantbaseddietitian.com. It's in all my books and my papers, but that is the best dosing that we know to date, and that is what we recommend. In terms of vitamin D, in terms of vitamin D, it is a sunshine vitamin, and technically we're supposed to go out in the sun and expose our skin, and ideally we absorb the UVB rays, and it goes into our skin, and then it gets activated in our liver and our kidneys, and then we have active vitamin D. But somehow, some way, we have this quote unquote worldwide deficiency or insufficiency of vitamin D. Now, it's interesting, it is the vitamin du jour, and it's actually kind of had even a bigger notable, notoriety surge again with COVID, but there is associations between low vitamin D and a lot of different adverse health associations. So I recommend, because it's not like B12 where you can't really get toxic on it because B12 is a water soluble nutrient. Instead, vitamin D is a fat soluble nutrient. It is possible to have too much. So again, just because something is good doesn't mean more is better. I have my clients test their blood to know their level of vitamin D before blindly supplementing. I do recommend for the general population, a 2000 IU is a good maintenance mode dose, but I don't like to recommend supplements specifically, especially when it comes to vitamin D. But that said, it is something to be mindful of. Vitamin K2, well, I've been recommending K2 supplements for years, and then Dr. Greger came and we had a whole discussion about this, and he's convinced me to think twice. So I'm now debating whether or not we do need the K2 because of this. It's a whole complicated thing, but the K1 we get, make sure you're getting lots of leafy green vegetables. That's where we get it on a plant-based diet. And that's why I'm wearing my leafy green shirt, because I love leafy greens so much. You want to get them from the low oxalate greens. You want to get them from the kale, the lettuce, cabbage, bok choy, broccoli, as opposed to spinach and chard and beet greens, which have higher in oxalates. But we get plenty of vitamin K1 from that. The question mark was about K2 because that's a different form. So I'm now digging back into literature, so stay tuned for more details on that. In terms of zinc and iodine, these are two trace minerals that are required. Zinc, of course, is important. You've heard about it talked in reference to immune function, neurological function, and growth. You get it from plants. We can get this from plants in the nuts and seeds and legumes, which is why those are the 6 daily threes, important essential food groups. But because of possible absorption issues, research suggests that vegans may fall short on zinc. So this is something to consider. You might want to just run it through a nutrition calculator or consider supplementing. Iodine we need for thyroid function and other things related to metabolism. Interestingly, I learned about this in grad school and then it kind of disappeared because we iodize salt, but we're seeing this kind of resurgence. And I don't know if this has actually been documented yet, but I'm seeing it with my clients of goiters. And this could be because of too much or too little of iodine. So it's not that you want more. You have to have the right amount. For adults, that's 150 micrograms a day. But what happened, we stopped using iodized salt because a lot of people are watching their salt because they're hypertensive or because they're, for whatever reason, or they're using fancy salts. They're using Himalayan salt and they're using black lava salt, and these are not iodized. So it's interesting, we're seeing this resurgence of having problems with iodine deficiency. So be mindful of that. The final notable nutrient is a macronutrient, and we're going back to fats really briefly. These are the long chain omega-3 fatty acids that you hear about with people taking fish oil, and you probably hear about the omega-3s quite a lot. This is an essential fat. We do need omega-3 fatty acids, and we get them on a plant-based diet from ALA, alpha-linolenic acid. Our body then elongates it into EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and then further elongates it into docosahexaenoic acid. These are just fun words. You think vegetarian is hard, try saying docosahexaenoic acid. That's a real fun one. But we need all of these different forms for different reasons and these different intermediaries as well. However, vegans tend to have lower amounts of these in their blood. Is that a problem? We don't know. So a lot of us are recommending taking a microalgae supplement just to make sure we're getting enough and to make sure you're getting the ALA sources from, the chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts. Those are really good sources. So just to summarize some of the health benefits of a whole food plant-based diet, again, this is just a very small list because the research keeps expanding and growing. I've got this meme all over my website and my social media because I love that this is so well substantiated. This is the stuff that we know so well is to be true, and there's more and more growing every day. So we know that a plant-based diet, like I said at the beginning, is the only diet ever shown to actually reverse, not just manage, advanced stage cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes, but it's also shown substantially in the literature to be associated with lower BMI and body fat, lower overall mortality from ischemic heart disease, to reduce medication requirements. I say this all the time, results are typical, my clients do get off their medications. It blows me away every single time. My client recently got off of her blood pressure meds in 1 week. That was one of the records for me with working with clients. It's also associated with reduced incidence of hypertension, hyperlipidemia, hyperglycemia, reduced risk for certain cancers, reduced obesity, inflammatory markers, and basically it just helps live longer, not just live longer. A nutritious, whole food, plant-based diet should include vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, and infinite tasty combinations. It's the foundation for the diet that Ansel and Margaret Keyes documented when they visited the Mediterranean and noted the dramatically different rate of cardiovascular disease compared to the Minnesotan counterparts. 50 years later, we've seen these same results induced in model organisms. We even see indications that these benefits may be in part determined by a collection of sirtuin genes that are conserved throughout our biology. A whole food, plant-based diet supports living longer, not just living longer. So thank you for listening. I will open it up to questions. And I will stop my screen share if I can.
Can you guys hear me?
I can.
Okay, well, everybody, can we first do a big, yeah, awesome. Thank you, thank you. Okay, I'll just do it myself. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Questions?
We have questions in the chat. I was muted when I was trying to talk. We have a couple questions that popped up in the chat box when you're presenting. I was writing down notes so because they start streaming up. Are nut butters okay?
They are categorized in the nut category. So I recommend 1 to 2 ounces. The research suggests 1 to 2 ounces of nuts and seeds a day. Nut butters count, and flax seeds and almond butter and all of those, the seed butters, those are all in the nuts and seeds category.
Can I ask you a question as a follow-up? As a heart disease patient and a whole food plant-based no oil person, I've stayed away personally. I'll take a handful of walnuts. That's about it. You know, of course, I'm more on the Esselstyn side of the ledger, and we all know that. And I think if you're a part of a journey and you're headed toward that way, you could have whatever in those categories. But to somebody who's got heart disease, direct heart disease, your thoughts on the nut butters? Because I've always had I've been leery about that. I like it, but I'm leery about it. Your thoughts?
I mean, that's not an oil because it's not processed, it's just blended. So it's not the same as an oil. An oil is extracted pure fat. Right. I don't recommend oils. And there's a lot of cardiometabolic benefits of consuming nuts and seeds. And Dr. Estes talks about this all the time too. So it's actually health promoting for anyone, no matter the story, to have, unless there's an allergy, obviously, but they're really health promoting. Cardiometabolic benefits are out the roof in the research.
Good, okay.
Another follow-up to his same question. I tend to let it sit and I pour the extra oil off the top and then mix the peanut butter. Am I then missing out on the essentials?
That's a good question. No, you're just decreasing a little bit of the fat, and it's like, how much are you taking? Maybe you're taking more of the, no, you're not. I do that sometimes. It just makes it hard culinarily speaking to get that bottom part out, but that's fine.
Thanks.
We have a question that came in. What are your thoughts on eating natto? I was including it to get the vitamin K2.
Natto, yes. If you like natto, you go. You do you. I cannot eat natto, and it's not easily accessible, but it is indeed the good source for K2. So good job.
Okay, that's good. Now I can know how to pronounce it properly. We have a question. A handful of walnuts is an ounce, correct? Is that what you recommend?
Well, a handful. How much is a handful? It's about a quarter cup to a half a cup. A quarter cup is about an ounce. About half a cup is about 2 ounces.
Okay.
And then 30 to 40 grams. That's the other way if you think in grams, because a handful could get real sketchy. And I do advise people to not do the hand to mouth method, because I think a lot of people get into problems with nuts and seeds when they do that. I just had to had a whole sit down with my client yesterday about this, because even I have the healthiest clients and we can't figure out why the cholesterol won't go down. The diets look so good. And if I run those nuts and seeds through like a nutrition software and I see, wow, the saturated fat does add up. So you want to be really careful of that. So you're measuring a little bit, but you don't have to get crazy about it. Just the hand to mouth makes it harder. So I recommend blending them into dressings and sauces. That's how I enjoy my nuts and seeds. I have a bunch of recipes in all of my books, and my new book that I'm working on right now, I've got book deadlines, so I'm doing tons of recipe development right now. I use nuts and seeds as a base for the ingredients for sauces and dressings, and pour them over delicious salads and cooked vegetables and however else I bake them. And that's my most delicious, my favorite way to get my nuts and seeds in my diet. Plus, then you get the fat with those phytonutrients that are fat soluble, and that helps improve absorption, which is good too.
And so many plant cheese recipes include cashews. That's how I use cashews most of the time. We have a question. Can we eat additional protein powder in our diet?
I don't recommend it. It's pure. So the way oil is to fat and the way sugar is to carbohydrate, protein powder is isolated protein. And like I said, the research is showing us that perhaps less protein is what is extending health span and longevity. And that's perhaps one of the benefits of a plant-based diet. And there are, sometimes I'll have clients that are severely ill and malnourished and can't get enough calorie. I would still rather them have just like add some hemp seeds to their diet or add some other ways of getting more calorie, but I don't recommend isolated concentrated protein powders.
I agree.
Yeah. And then we have a question about oatmeal. How do you feel about oatmeal?
It's great.
Yeah. Enjoy it.
It's got a really good for cholesterol, like extra added bonus of cholesterol lowering. So it's great. And a lot of people love oatmeal. So eat your oatmeal.
We're an oatmeal family here. I love overnight oats.
Hey, by the way, on oatmeal, everybody, combine, try this for a spice mix: nutmeg, apple pie spice, cinnamon, and pumpkin spice. Put them all together. And I'm telling you, when I make my oatmeal with the fruit, before I put the milk on it, I kind of dash it with the spices, and it just blows it up for taste. So once again, it's a combination of cinnamon, nutmeg, pumpkin spice pie, okay, whatever, you get it, and apple pie spice. So try that as a mixture. You'll love it.
And if you would like the shortcut
you said milk on it. I'm assuming you're talking about almond milk.
yeah.
No, I was talking about soy milk, but some type of plant-based milk.
Plant-based
And a
milk.
shortcut to that is Spice Island brand pumpkin pie spice has all that in it.
Awesome. All right.
That one's fantastic. We have another question. I lost it because the stream keeps moving. I have a question about the Plant Paradox book by Dr. Gundry. He said to avoid foods with lectins, such as legumes, peppers, tomatoes, corn, seeds, etc. What do you think of this idea of avoiding lectins in order to lose weight?
The only food group in common between all of the blue zones were legumes. And people have been consuming legumes. And this guy comes along and sells anti-lectin supplements. And Dr. Greger did the best video on this. I always refer people to that because it's such a scandal. It's such a scam, this whole lectin thing. Like, who's going to say lentils are unhealthy? You're going to fight with thousands of research articles over decades and decades showing the benefits of legumes. I think that's insanity. I can't even take it seriously, honestly, because there's no research to show that. There are these compounds in plant foods that do different things with absorption, but that's good. And that's why I mentioned zinc, because of the phytates and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean that it's bad and toxic. It means that it's just part of consuming plants with all this wonderful fiber and these nutrients. So, I mean, I've worked with thousands of people to lose weight and get healthy eating plant foods that contain these compounds, but that's not like picking apart to build up these stories. To me is just, it's amazing to me. It's amazing that it could be so provocative. I think people want a little quick hack or an answer beyond having to kind of make drastic changes. So I don't.
Who was the doctor, Julieanna, who you referred to, who refuted this?
On Michael Greger on nutritionfacts.org has a great video, just a great video. If you just do Gundry on nutritionfacts.org, it's the best video. I love it.
Michael Greger?
Yes, Greger.
And he will be here next month in March, so we can ask him about that as well.
Okay.
Are dried mushrooms or canned mushrooms as nutritious as fresh mushrooms?
I don't know much about canned mushrooms. usually I'll just say, generally speaking, canned is usually the least optimal. It's not bad. It's like, compared to what? Are you gonna have no mushrooms? You're probably better to have the canned mushrooms. Can you have fresh mushrooms? That's probably best. Dried mushrooms are great. They add so much delicious umami to the table. The only thing you don't want to have are raw mushrooms. Raw mushrooms have a compound in it that can be toxic, and it doesn't have all the health benefits. It needs to be cooked to have all of the health benefits, but there are extraordinary benefits to mushrooms. So yeah, I don't know about canned compared to the fresh, but I don't know, frozen is always, can be sometimes better than fresh in all produce, because it's flash frozen. They harvest it and then pop it in the freezer. So it saves all that time from harvest to getting to your kitchen to getting to your plate. And so frozen, generally speaking, is always good. Canned, it's sometimes stuff leaches, sometimes it just, what is it canned in? It just, there's a lot of variables there.
Okay. Can you explain why vitamin D is a hormone, but yet commonly known as a vitamin?
It's both. It's one of those fun little, like, haha, I'm going to keep you guessing. It's a hormone and a vitamin.
Okay. Which form of B12 do you recommend? Because as you know, there's different forms.
Yes, I recommend the cyanocobalamin. There's arguments to be made with people with the MTHR gene, the methylcobalamin, but the recommendations that I gave, the 50 micrograms twice a day, 150 micrograms once a day, or the 2,500 micrograms once a week, are all based on cyanocobalamin. It's the cheapest, the most stable, easiest to find, and that's the form I recommend.
Do you have a certain brand that you recommend? That's my own question.
Yes.
The brand was my question.
Yeah, no, I'm not right now.
Okay. I know a lot of people like the Garden of Life spray. I think that's cyano. I don't know if you recommend that one or not.
I don't want to.
Okay. We got another question. Do you recommend fortified over unfortified nutritional yeast, or are both okay?
Yeah. Okay. So I do recommend the unfortified. I use the fortified because it's so much cheaper and I use so much of it, but it's probably not good. So we're worried about the folic acid, just too much vitamins. Like too much, just because something's good doesn't mean more is better. And one of the things that is a nutrient of concern in a fortified yeast would be the folic acid. So if you could find it, actually, there's more brands. I've actually discovered a new brand where I'm excited about it because it's easier to find. I found it on Amazon. There's a few brands that are unfortified, so preferably unfortified.
Right.
Yeah.
We like Sari brand, SARI. It's unfortified. And then Dylan Holmes, Well Your World, who we had here at PBNSG, his is unfortified. So yeah, I agree with you about the folic acid versus the folate. What about oxalates?
Well, I addressed that. They're present. And if you've got a tendency or proclivity to kidney disease or kidney stones, really, you want to be careful of them. And actually, I recommend everyone just mix up their greens. And like I said before, I'll say it again, it's important. And it's on, if you go to my website, plantbaseddietitian.com, and you look up 6 Daily Threes or my pyramid or any of my memes and graphics, I always identify, I have a list of all my books. I talk about this because just to remember. So spinach and chard and beet greens, those are very high in oxalates, and you want to go towards a low oxalate. So kale is good, bok choy, lettuce, cabbage, those are my favorite choices, but mix it up. But if you have a tendency towards oxalate stones, you also want to be careful of beets and chocolate. And there's some other things I would recommend looking up to be careful of. General population, it's not something to be of concern. Just mix up your greens.
Okay. I'm trying to scroll through. I would love to have the info on where the lower protein's better, because I have recently worked with a nutritionist for sleep, and she told me I need to go back to meat and 25 milligram breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This person helped a friend with chronic insomnia. I'm so torn. You get the idea. We're all told to have more protein. So
I would invite you to dig into some of my stuff. I've got 2 peer-reviewed journal articles, plant-based diets for healthcare professionals. So you could actually go to the primary sources in the book, The Health Span Solution, my last book. There's many articles. I think there's over 200 references if you really want to, and we talk about it. Like there's a deep dive into why lower protein, and I don't say lower protein, just getting enough protein. It's hard to get low protein on a whole food plant-based diet. It's pretty much impossible to have a deficiency. And this is what we're up against, you guys. Like, this is what, I teach doctors and dietitians, they're all telling people to get more protein. And in the pursuit of more protein, we have more and more obesity, more and more chronic disease, more and more people with dying of food-borne illness, and unnecessarily so. There is no protein deficiency. If you're malnourished because you're not getting enough calorie, or you've got a health condition that causes you to be malnourished, therein lies where you might have this happen, protein concern. But if you're eating a whole food plant-based diet and you're doing the 6 daily threes and you're getting your legumes and your nuts and seeds, it's not a problem. Too much is a problem. We are in a society of overconsumption, chronic overnutrition. This is the problem. It's not, no one is dying of not no one, I should never say that, but most people aren't dying of protein deficiencies. I've never seen it, except for people that come to me with eating disorders, and I don't really work with anorexia very much. I refer out, but that's when I would see it, or someone that's got like severe malnourishment. That is not because of eating a plant-based diet. More protein is not better.
I agree with you. We have a question. I don't quite know what the question is, so I'm just going to read. Dr. Walter Longo's Prolong FMD.
Mm-hmm.
Opinion on that?
Yeah, it's a fasting mimicking
Yeah,
diet.
I would say, yeah, that was my question, Juliana. I'm on the 4th day of the fasting mimicking diet that Dr. Longo recommends in his book Longevity Diet, and Joel Kahn also recommends that. And so I wondered what you thought of the fasting mimicking diet, and I think protein too. I think in his book Longevity Diet, he talks about what was it, 0.30 proteins per pound per person. So that's about the protein that he recommends consuming, right? So if you're 160 pounds or thereabouts, you can do the math, and it comes up to, I don't know, 50 to 60 grams of protein a day you can consume. So I wondered what you thought of both the mimicking diet and then that level of protein consumption.
Well, I love the idea of time restricted feeding. The evidence is substantial for time restricted feeding and the health benefits. So, but I would rather people do it with food rather than the processed products found in those. That it's just a product. It's a product. It's a marketing thing. I'd rather you do it with food, to eat less frequently in a time restricted window. That's what I do with my clients, and eating whole plant foods. So I'd rather people to be able to do this on their own with food. And like I teach my clients, I don't even prescribe meal plans. I teach people how to make this work and how to make it a lifestyle, how to like jump in the kitchen, make something really quickly and easily, and have delicious cuisine that's on par with all of this. In terms of the protein, again, we're back to getting enough protein, but he is going back to what we all been saying since the beginning, and what for some reason gets so, it's because we're counting and we don't need to count. The recommendations, if you look at the Institute of Medicine recommendations, everyone recommends 0.8, generally speaking, 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight per day of protein. That's what I think you were suggesting. That ends up being about 45, I think it's 45 grams for women and 50 for men, whatever it is. I don't count protein. I want everyone to stop counting protein, carbs, and fat. I want no more talk of macros because it's not doing anyone any good. You don't need to count. My clients don't count. It's so alleviating and empowering to think I just need to eat vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices. Prioritize the 6 daily threes. So I'm making sure I'm getting 1.5 servings of legumes, 1 to 2 ounces of nuts and seeds, at least 3 servings of cruciferous and leafy green vegetables, at least 3 servings of other colored veggies, at least 3 servings of fruits a day. Boom. That's it. Think about food, not nutrition, because nutrients like that, the macros, it's so frustrating. And again, you can basically say that a donut and a 3-bean lentil chili or 3-bean chili with quinoa, whatever, are carbohydrates, would be in the same category. It means nothing. Protein, you'll get enough if you're not eating. If you want to challenge yourself, if you really want to do something, I don't suggest doing this at home, but if you want to try to get not enough protein on your diet, that would mean, eating white sugar, white flour, and oil, and not consuming these whole foods. But that is the premise of the longevity research. And that is where the health span data has shown that reducing your amino acids, we don't want more of those essential amino acids. We actually, the animals that do the best are the ones that have the lower amounts of it, and that actually by what they ate. So it goes back to calorie, like I said before. If you look at the data on the rhesus macaques, and they compared these same monkeys that they followed for whatever their lifespan was, 2 different groups, and one was eating 30% less monkey chow. Same monkey chow, 30% less. Same exact food, same macro profile, if you will, but 30% less. So that would be a fasting mimicking diet, really. It's just eating in a fat, like not eating all day long, not staying in a fed state all throughout the day, which is what causes overnutrition. Those monkeys lived longer, had less disease than the ones that ate the same food, but 30% more. So that to me says, and that's what this research, what Dr. Longo's research is, all that was he goes back with other different microorganisms that he studied, or different organisms that he studied. And it's all about just eating less. And so less is a good thing. And specifically, it looks like less amino acids.
Okay. We have a question. What are your thoughts on DNA-based eating?
I don't know what that is. You mean like genetic profiling for different?
It sounds similar to like blood type diet. Michelle, can you elaborate? You can unmute yourself. Your question was, what are your thoughts on DNA-based eating?
Oh, okay. I just had my genetic testing done through a lab, and they recommend, it's a recommended higher carbohydrates, more plant-based. And I just wondered, is there a lot of validity to DNA testing for foods?
I mean, we're 99.99% genetically the same. So why would lentils be good for one person, not the other? I haven't seen any research supporting it, so I couldn't argue for it. I don't know if there's research to support anything about it. Like, more carbohydrates to me says, again, back to see why I say this. This is the crux of all this is the kerfuffle. Like, what does that mean, more carbohydrates? So should I have more sugar because I should eat more carbohydrates? Or am I good just going back to eating more lentils and, quinoa and broccoli? So it's like a prescription for what, so I haven't seen any research saying that would be any more beneficial than eating a whole food plant-based diet. So I don't know.
Thank you.
We have a question from Bob about wine. How many glasses of wine do you drink a week?
Is that a personal question? I don't go by my personal consumption of wine, but I go by the standard recommendations, because this is just the guideline that we all give in the healthcare world, is that, well, no amount of alcohol is technically healthy, but they limit it. The recommendations are to limit it to 1 serving for women a day max, and 2 servings for men a day max. 1 serving is 1 ounce of hard alcohol, distilled alcohol, or 4 ounces of wine, or a beer, a 12-ounce beer. So that's the max. But again, it's a toxin to all of the cells. But again, like I said, I do love a glass of wine. So personally speaking, I do love wine, but it's not healthy. I don't consider I'm doing it for my health. I just enjoy it. So those are the general recommendations. I just stick to those.
I don't see any other questions that she hasn't covered. I'm scrolling through fast to make sure I didn't miss anything, unless anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question that I may have missed in the stream. Oh, this one I did miss. Any thoughts on using vinegar and GERD?
Like vinegar as a treatment for GERD?
I think so. Like apple cider vinegar, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know if, because it could be alkalizing. I haven't seen research specifically on that or protocol for that, but like standard for GERD would be make sure you're sitting up, you don't overstuff yourself, you're at a healthy weight, that you don't lay down after meals, that you, those are like the basic general guidelines that we give. Like, you be careful of things like spicy foods or too much caffeine, alcohol can affect GERD, but I haven't seen vinegar as a treatment per se, but I don't think it could hurt to try, because vinegar is healthy and delicious.
Yes, it is.
I have a quick healthcare professional question. I deal with a lot of gestational diabetes in my practice, and I am gaining ground with the providers who are telling the patients to eat a protein snack at bedtime and, have a cheese stick and this and that. So fortunately, a lot are Latino and they'll eat beans before bed. I also have Burmese population. I'll try peanut butter with apples, or this type of a thing. Do you have any kind of snack ideas that I can give patients that would help them through the night?
Oh, it's such a hard question because it depends on the whole diet. I don't do meal planning like
I
that
know.
because
I'm
Huh?
trying to balance two worlds, and I'm
Right.
infusing as much plant-based as I can without getting slammed. But and I'm making a lot of progress with all of the providers,
That's
but
good.
I'm trying to come up with some good ideas because some of them do legitimately need a snack. They're gestational. And so there's blood sugar issues, there's hormonal issues, and nutrient needs. And so I think probably what I'm suggesting is working. I just thought I'd throw it at you. So I'm good.
Well, I also don't like to I don't like to individuate meals into breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, dessert. Like I don't do that. My last book was soup, salad, sides, and sweets. I'm doing something similar in this book because it doesn't matter. Like a snack, whatever. It's like, it's just a term. It's like if they were eating a chili and they love their chili, then have a little bit of chili. Or if I always say hummus should be a food group. So hummus and crudité. But again, like it doesn't necessarily, like if you really like oatmeal and flaxseed and berries, then why you could call that a snack or breakfast, whatever you want, or have it for dinner, breakfast for dinner. So any of the healthy whole food plant-based meals that we suggest would be fine, just I guess in smaller quantities depending on their specific needs.
Perfect. Thank you.
I had a question that I raised before, Megan. I don't know if you saw it, but Dr. Longo talks in his book too on the Mediterranean diet about salmon maybe once a week. And I wondered what you thought of that, number one. What do you think of honey? And then McDougall talks a lot about starches and potatoes, right? I mean, that's his big deal, potatoes, right? He would eat potatoes every day, and what your thought is on that as well.
Well, Walter Longo in his fasting mimicking, pardon? Well, on the fasting mimicking diet, or the stuff talking about Walter Longo's work and the fish one, so we don't know how, you saw what I said about the Mediterranean diet is about 10% of calories from animal product, less than, that would probably be less than 10%. So we don't know how much we can get away with. It's probably fine.
Okay.
And then the second question was about honey. If you're vegan, vegans don't usually eat honey, but a lot of vegans do. They call them, they have different, they say vegans, I've heard vegans. But I consider from a health perspective, forget the ethical perspective, I consider it a added sugar. And so you use that in your calculation of, not that I recommend anyone has to count or calculate, as you've heard me say many times tonight, less than 5% of your total calories come from added sweeteners. And that would count in that category if you wanted to. I would put that in that category. Also date syrup or date paste, maple syrup. And then those are the ones that I would recommend. Or that's the ones I use, are dates, date paste, or date syrup, or maple syrup. Those are the sweeteners I use in my recipes.
Okay.
We have one last question that came in. Any recommendation in terms of more appropriate foods to maintain a healthy prostate?
That's
Health.
what I love about this way of eating. It's like a one size fits all diet. It helps everything. I can't tell you the things that I've seen turn around that we didn't expect to ever be able to be turned around, things that I didn't see coming, like weird things. And for prostate too, because, well, we know that, well, I would suggest maybe incorporating some soy foods into your life, some tofu or tempeh or edamame, because that has been linked to decreased risk for prostate cancer. But vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, mushrooms, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, you're getting all those phytonutrients, you're getting all the vitamins and minerals, and what you're not getting are the health damaging compounds, the stuff that you find in animal products, the stuff you find in processed foods. So you're avoiding all that stuff that can promote the disease process and be hard on the organs. Instead, you want to be focusing on flooding your system with health promoting things and avoiding the things that are health damaging. But it really is a one size fits all. I can't even tell you guys, it's amazing what I've seen in 25 years. So yeah, plants.
Thank you. Yes, plants, they're medicine, right? That's what I tell everybody. Also, if anyone thinks of questions later on, I know sometimes after an event, you think, oh, I wish I'd asked this. Feel free to email me at megan@pbnsg.org or connect@pbnsg.org, and I'll go ahead and relay the question and we can find you the answer that way. Another question has popped in. We about grain. You support grain breads, correct? You like every grain. You like vegetables, fruits, grains, legumes, right? As much as we want.
Whole grains, yeah.
Whole grain, of course. Whole grains are the best.
For bread, I recommend sprouted grain if you're going to do bread.
Right. Well, thank you. We're so thankful to have you. You had a fantastic presentation, and please, everyone know that.
Yeah, awesome.
And everybody will get the recording of this 24 hours after the event. So if you came in late for whatever reason, you can start from the beginning and watch it. Plus, I was trying to take down notes during the event, and then I realized, oh, I'm gonna get the recording, so you can go back and refresh your memory on the vitamin K and the B12 and all those things. You did a fantastic job. Thank you. You are so smart, and you make everything so simple. I think, Paul, you have a question. I think I hear you.
Well, I have a comment. If everyone just gets a pencil and a piece of paper, in my promise to the world that I'm going to make one dish a week that's simple for me, I want to share it with you. It's only got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ingredients. It's so quick. Juliana, you could have it as a gift from me to you to put it in your book. Here we go. It's a tzatziki sauce. Okay. So I love salads. Okay. So I wanted to make a creamy lime dressing. So I created a tzatziki sauce, and here we go. I'll go slow. Here we go. Oh, okay. You wait before everyone stay on. I'll give it to you, Juliana. Thank you. Mwah. I will talk to you soon. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Lots of leafy green love.